For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal. I'm Surya Gangadharan. Is India in an emerging sweet spot when it comes to military high-tech? That's the question we're going to ask today. And some of the evidence so far hasn't been very good if you look at Indian military programs like the MiG-21, etc. But in recent months, we have had some progress towards which suggests that the future may not be that bad. For instance, India and the US have a joint technology group to look at collaboration in space, artificial intelligence, and cyber. There are plans to develop air launched UAVs and counter UAV systems. There are also plans for intelligence surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance platforms. And there's also an industrial security agreement that will facilitate collaboration in cutting edge defense technologies. But that is in the future. I'm looking at the present. I have with me Nitin Gokhale, editor in chief of StratNewsGlobal. Nitin, welcome. Since we're looking at the present, all this buzz going around about fighter jet for the Navy, we understand that this is going to be, again, something that is going to be made in India. It's going to be very different from what we've seen so far.
Well, yes, thanks, Surya. A very important topic that we are discussing today. And the first few opening points that you made about some of the technology that is being jointly sought to be developed by India and the US is part of the statement of the 2+2 summit meeting between the Indian Defense and External Affairs Minister and the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense from the US, which happened in April. But coming to your specific question about the fighter jets for the third aircraft carrier or the second aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant, which is under sea trial right now, indigenously developed, its air component has not yet been decided. That means the fighter jets based on the carrier deck are not yet finalized. That's where I think the competition is going to be between the suppliers of these twin-engine fighter jets for the carrier. And according to the evidence that is available so far, the French Rafale naval version have already had their trials and tests done in Goa, which is the shore-based testing facility. And right now, as we speak, the Super Hornets FA-18 of the Boeing are undergoing the similar tests and trials in Goa. And this will continue till 15th of June is what one is hearing. So clearly these two are the front runners. But behind this race is also a larger enterprise or larger thought process in the government of India, which now emphasizes on Atmanirbharta or self-reliance in defense and how to leverage the sweet spot, as you mentioned, for India right now, where India is a buyer's market and most OEMs and other manufacturers would want to come into India and not allow themselves to be shunted out or shut out of the Indian market. That's where the current position is, and we'll have to wait and watch. But there are several aspects to this which we can break down as we go along. But the fact is, yes, India is in a sweet spot as far as the military technology transfer is concerned, driven not just by its needs for its ever expanding armed forces, but also because of the changed geopolitical situation, Surya.
Mm-hmm. So let's look at that big $1 million thing, that piece of equipment called a jet engine. I understand we are insisting upon some of these countries that want to sell fighters to India, that you build the jet engine here first. Is that realistic?
Well, one of the shortcomings in India has been the development of a original jet engine in India. India, for its even indigenous fighter jet program, the Light Combat Aircraft Tejas, has used the GE 404 engine. And GE, of course, has been insisting that for the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, which is the future program for the Indian Air Force, it must take one of the GE engines, the Advanced 414 GE engine. But there is also Safran, whose engine is used in the Rafale fighter jet, which the Indian Air Force bought in 2016. and has now completed its deliveries. Two squadrons are up and running. The 4.5 generation Rafale fighter jets in the Indian Air Force. They are powered by the Safran engine made in France. Now, the race or the competition is between these two at the moment, because the AMCA program is important for the Indian Air Force going forward in the next decade. After the LCAs are inducted and some of the fighter jets are bought in the interim from the original equipment manufacturers, then the AMCA will be the mainstay for the Indian Air Force, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. And that's where I think the government of India is insisting that the engine must be manufactured, whichever engine is chosen has to be manufactured in India. That's where I think the offers are being sweetened by the original equipment manufacturers, especially the French, as I learn. Safran is keen to set up a manufacturing facility in India for the AMCA program. And if that happens, then automatically it is assumed by certain commentators that Rafale will be then the favored aircraft for the Indian Air Force program called the Multi-Role Fighter Aircraft Acquisition of 110 fighter jets. That tender is already out. The responses have come in. But there, as the Indian Air Force chief had told us in an interview just about a fortnight ago, that the route to buy the fighter jets in the interim from an original equipment manufacturer from abroad would be buy global, make in India. That means you buy some of them off the shelf and then make rest of them in India. If that is happening, and if the engine also gets dovetailed there, and the manufacturing of the engine, then we have a very big program coming up for the Indian military aviation as far as fighter jets are concerned. I think that's something which will be watched very closely. And according to some of the reports that have appeared recently, both these are in competition and both are wooing the Indian decision makers with offers that are competitive and which are very good for the Indian military and the Indian decision makers.
So does that include the GE engine also, the F414? Are they willing to build here?
Yes, I mean that's what I think is being told to GE, perhaps by the Indian interlocutors. I suspect this is from the DRDO, because everything initially comes to the Defense Research and Development Organization, which is the government's arm for technology transfer. And I think DRDO officials have been told by GE as well as by the Safran, perhaps. I have no definite information on this, but there is indication that these two engine manufacturers would be sort of in discussion with the DRDO officials, and including the Indian Air Force and maybe even the Prime Minister's office for the future program and future offers that they have for India. But let me add here also, one of the leading industrialists in India, Baba Kalyani of Bharat Forge, who has a defense arm, the Kalyani Strategic Systems, has also said this to me about 2 years ago when COVID was at its peak. That one of his dreams as an industrialist who is into hardcore manufacturing is to develop a jet engine, maybe in collaboration with other Indian companies, maybe in collaboration with OEMs from abroad, or even with DRDO. And I suspect many of the companies which are now entering defense in a big way in India, Bharat Forge, Tata's, L&T, Mahindras, they all, and even the Adanis, who are now making a big foray into the in the defense sector, would be keen to collaborate with either Safran or with GE if the decision to manufacture those engines happens in India.
Mhm. No, we've been struggling with our own homegrown UAV program. I recall the Rustam has been around for a long time. Is there any way you can short circuit that development process? Are the other bidders who are saying willing to collaborate on building drones here?
Oh, well, yes, there are many OEMs, and especially a strategic system like the General Atomics manufactured the Predators or the Sea Guardians are on the table for a long time. We have been hearing that they are going to be bought. 30 of them are going to be bought very soon, and many of the people have been saying that the three forces have now agreed on what they need from GA. But the government of India hasn't apparently taken any decision on that. But if the GA comes in here with those numbers which are touted about, sometimes 30, sometimes 24, that 8 each for three services or 10 each for three services, then they'll have to have a component of Make in India in that offer or in that process, which could include an MRO, which is the maintenance, repair, overhaul. It could have a center for excellence for UAV technology. It could have disruptive technologies for other sectors like nuclear energy or fusion. I mean, the sky is the limit. Once you have the leverage to ask these companies to come and set up manufacturing or have these components which are essentially part of the Make in India campaign or the Make in India policy that has been adopted by the government of India. And there are, of course, Surya, let's not forget that there are Indian players now. There was a 2-day drone festival which was extended by a day by the Prime Minister's office this weekend, where more and more Indian startups, Indian companies, and even Indian defense majors are now coming into both the drone and the counter drones as far as the use of these are concerned for the three services.
No, Nitin, you mentioned the word leverage. This seems to have crept upon us virtually unacknowledged, or maybe we didn't notice. Somehow it's up there, and it seems to be working. So, where did this happen?
Well, there are these stages in every nation's life, as you see. What happens was because of the geopolitical changes that we are seeing, the flux that is there in geopolitics, India's dependence on Russia for decades has been a sore point with the West. But India itself has realized this for the past decade or so
Yeah.
that it needs to get away from the Russia dependence on Russia, and it has got accentuated this feeling or this realization after the Russia-Ukraine war. Remember, the Indian naval ships are dependent on the the engines for the ships mainly from Ukraine. And if the Ukraine facilities or the Ukraine war doesn't end, the engines are going to be in short supply. Although I'm told that the Indian Navy has supplies for at least the next 3 or 4 years. But what happens after that? So perhaps the government is also looking for, from what I understand, is the Indian Navy is encouraging Indian private sector as well as public sector enterprise like the Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited to go in for manufacturing the engines for the ships, the turbines, the gas turbine engines that are required. So this is a mix of circumstances forcing India to look for self-reliance, self-dependence, and also the changed geopolitical situation. So the US is very keen, from what we know from the statements in both post the 2+2 as well as post the Quad summit which happened in Japan just the other week, that the US wants India to be on board in its effort to concentrate on Indo-Pacific as the next challenge and wean India away from Russia, which India realizes, but India doesn't want to say it openly for its
Yeah.
own reasons of its own strategic ties with
Yeah.
Russia, as you are aware very well.
Yeah. Since you use the word strategic, what about strategic systems like nuclear submarines, which the Russians have collaborated with us in building? I mean, where do we go for that?
I think it's too early to look for an alternative beyond Russia for nuclear submarines and the technology. Although one must say that the Aryan series of submarines are already up and running. The entire the manufacturing line or the assembly line by mostly using indigenous technology for especially for the nuclear reactors on board the submarines. And company like L&T has now started specializing along with hundreds and thousands of other smaller companies and MSMEs has perfected the art of building a nuclear submarine for India. So I think down the line, in a decade or so, India will also be fully equipped to manufacture, design, develop, and manufacture nuclear submarines going forward. The challenge would always be to integrate the weapons and the sensors on the submarines, or even the fighter jets like the LCA, or going forward a tank, a main battle tank. For instance, I heard somewhere, and it's not yet corroborated, that the Germans, during the last summit meeting with Prime Minister Modi and the German Chancellor last month in Germany, have offered their Leopard tanks to India, which has never been offered. No Western tank has ever been offered except for in 1965, when India could have perhaps got the patent tanks from US. We have always been using the Russian technology, the T series of tanks, T-70, T-52s, T-72s, and now T-90s. And therefore, this is something which India is in a position to leverage, as I keep saying time and again, that we are in a sweet spot. You mentioned that right at the beginning, because everyone wants the pie of the big Indian market going forward, because they can't sell it to China, and there is no other equivalent country which needs so many platforms and weapons from diverse sources as we see in India.
Mhm. Given the fact that tech transfer in India has got a bad name because of virtually no tech transfer, how do you measure? I know it's still early, but how do you measure going forward that technology has been transferred? How much? What kind? I mean, are there some norms being laid out?
I think the Defense Ministry and DRDO are working on those norms. Already, many of those specifications are laid down. And there is this category of procurement called IDDM in the MOD procurement manual, indigenously designed, developed, and manufactured, where they talk about 60% indigenous content and only 40%, I would say, imported content. Only then it will be designated as a Indian designed and manufactured product. Similarly, guidelines and strict adherence to the specifications will be insisted upon by India going forward, because ultimately India has realized, thankfully, because of recent crises which has happened across the world, and the kind of money India has had to pay through its nose during the crisis in the cross-border raids or the surgical strikes in Uri in 2016, during Galwan standoff with China in 2020 and beyond. India has now realized that it needs to be completely self-dependent on either ammunition or technology, which cannot be denied to it by either the West, especially the United States, or charged exorbitantly by countries such as Russia, which is known to have done that in the recent past. And therefore, India is now insisting and has issued a list of, as you are aware, nearly 220 weapons and platforms and components which are now banned from being imported. They have to be procured from Indian manufacturers and companies. So I think that's a good start, and we will have to see how this evolution takes place, how it develops. But that's the only way a country like India can become strategically autonomous in real sense when it comes to the crunch, when it comes to the brass tacks, really. Surya.
It's curious, Nitin. The army has been operating tanks of British and Russian varieties, even French, for 70, 80 years. The Navy has been operating submarines of possibly every country, Germany, Russia, France, you name it. Yet we're not able to develop, build, or design on our own. The Arjun, of course, is a bit of a lemon, but why is this so? Is it because of what's the issue?
Well, there are several factors. It's a separate discussion, as you are aware. So, several factors like changing specifications, rapidly changing specifications by the military, then the DRDO or its technical arms not being able to meet those requirements in time, taking enormous amount of time or delays in these kind of systems and platforms, and also a sabotage in a way, I would say, by these manufacturers from abroad who game the system, who had gamed the system in India and continued to either get the Indian systems sort of had negative perceptions being created about them, or delays in procurement or delays in testing. All those things have got combined to bring us to a situation where we are. But as I said, since 2020, then the when the actual real policy change came with the announcement by the then finance, I mean, by the finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman, and not by the MOD in one of the press conferences. I think things are changing. Everybody in India is now gung ho, especially Indian manufacturers are gung ho about their prospects of stress and emphasis on Indian technology. And the OEMs also now know that they need to have a joint venture or a venture in India to get a pie of the Indian market or the Indian defense market if they have to really survive here and flourish in coming years and decades. So I think that's where your original term sweet spot comes in, and that's where India has to now really capitalize on the circumstances and the combination of the need that has brought India to this level or this situation. Really.
And going forward, would you say government has internalized the need to bring in the private sector?
Oh, very much so, very much so. In fact, as you are aware, the OFB, the Ordnance Factory Board, has been corporatized. There is apparently a plan to even revamp and restructure DRDO. And as you are aware, in the last budget, it was announced that 25% of the DRDO's research budget would be earmarked for Indian private companies to be funded for research and development, which I think is a big start. I think that's where I think the Indian companies have been losing out, that they don't have spare funds or they do not have the wherewithal or the guts to invest in research and development. They've been very happy to get technology from abroad and then transfer it or show it as Indian technology. But all this should combine to give India that edge which it requires if it has to become a self-dependent, self-reliant power with hard power with the technology that is designed, developed, and manufactured in India.
Mhm. So, very quickly, Nitin, what would you say are those areas where we can make up technology gaps very quickly, and what are those areas where it could take more time?
Oh, like there will be the basic technologies like for tanks and for let's say the UAVs and the counter UAVs should not be a problem. The gaps can be quickly filled and plugged. But more intensive, technologically intensive systems like the Sea Guardians, for instance, or anything in space will have to be either initially collaborated with foreign manufacturers or designers. Even the nuclear submarines, we are still not there fully,
Yeah.
fully independent or autonomous. Same thing with the jet engine, for instance. We are still far away from having a jet engine of our own. But if all this comes true, or at least 80% of it comes true, then India is truly on a path to indigenization and becoming sort of self-dependent, as I keep saying repeatedly through this program.
And the key would be IPR. We would own the IPR in many of these projects being implemented here.
It has to be. In fact, that's the key. That if there are joint development and co-production and co-development happens with say Western countries, then one of the questions that I always have had in my mind is who owns the IP, and if you co-own the IP, then are these platforms and weapons then exportable to third countries? Will
Yeah.
the US or the West agree to those conditions?
Hmm.
Is something that I'm still searching for an answer. But we have an example of the BrahMos missile, for instance, which is
Yeah.
joint India-Russia production and venture, which has now got back the first order for export to Philippines, as you are aware, and the deliveries would begin early next year. So there is a precedence, and there is no reason why a large market that India possesses cannot be a sweetener for these companies, which are forever looking for new markets and new avenues to sell their ware. But this is something that India is leveraging and will leverage going forward, as far as the real technology transfer is concerned in the defense sector.
So, last question. As we go forward and we build our own technologies, do you see a transformation in the way we deal with other countries, with Russians, with others? I mean, the
Oh, there
dependence
will
is
be.
gone or reduced.
Certainly. In fact, that's one of the key, I think, changes that will come in the next decade or so. While we are still dependent, at least 45% of India's Indian military equipment from Russia or the old Soviet Union Empire, countries of that orbit. Certainly, this dependence is reduced from, say, 70% to now about 48%, according to the government's own admission, 47, 48%. So, which we are getting there. And I remember the late Manohar Parrikar as defense minister saying that my objective is to reduce imports by 10% every year, or dependence on import by 10%. I think if this continues, I think India will then change its equation, or there will be an automatic change in the way we deal with these countries like Russia or even the US, or even countries like Czech Republic or Ukraine. I don't know what will happen to Ukraine going forward. But some of these countries have been our main supplier. Israel, for instance, in fact, I must mention here that when I interviewed the Israeli ambassador to India the other day, I had one of these key questions to him, that what happens to the Israeli companies in defense who are very guarded about transferring their technology, when India is insisting that self-reliance, Atmanirbharta is the main key point in its new policy. He said very candidly that the Israeli companies will have to adjust. They'll have to
Okay.
adjust to the circumstances. In fact, that was very revealing, and they are aware of the reality. So I think India holds the upper hand at the moment, and it must not let this opportunity slip, which has presented itself through a combination of circumstances, need, and change geopolitical situation.
So, amen to that, Nitin. And of course, fingers crossed. Let's hope things work out. Thanks very much for that insight.
Sure. Thank you. Pleasure.
And for those of you who have joined us on this conversation, I hope you've subscribed to our YouTube channel. Your comments and observations are always welcome. Thank you very much. Good night.